Hi, everyone, and a very, very warm welcome back to season three of Commerce Meets Law, a podcast where we talk about various commercial topics and how they interact with the legal profession. I am so sorry about the delay in episodes. As usual, exams have sort of taken over. For those of you sitting in the SQE, this is probably familiar territory, but I am so excited to be able to come back, and always it's just such a pleasure to be able to do this podcast and have the opportunity to meet and speak to such incredible people, just like our guest today, which is truly one of my bucket list episodes. And it is with none other than Brian Altman, Joint Head of Chambers and King's Counsel at 2BR, alongside Christine Agnew KC. With over 4 decades of experience at the bar, Brian's career is filled with incredible successes. So in this episode, what we try to really do is just cover a few of those inflection points throughout the course of his career and try and uncover what it really takes to become an outstanding member of the legal profession and continue showing up every day to grow and challenge yourself and become better. We begin by discussing Brian's initial journey to the bar and how he secured pupillage, potentially a very different story to today and how it might be for a lot of aspiring barristers out there, but nonetheless a very interesting one. We also talk about, at the next kind of inflection point that I mentioned earlier, one of his proudest achievements of becoming junior and then senior Treasury Counsel. Brian explains the coveted nature of this position in a really articulate manner. I really didn't realize what it means and what it actually consisted of. So it was really interesting for me. And if you are in the same boat, I'm sure that you'll find this part really fascinating. So please do tune in for this part of the episode. We also then reflect on his 16 years as a prosecutor whilst he was part of the Treasury Council on some of the most high profile cases and how it really shaped him not only as a professional but also in his personal life as a parent, which I thought was really interesting. We then talk about the pivot from Brian being in court and that kind of being a part of his everyday life to then being part of some of the biggest statutory inquiries in the UK and the opportunities that this opened up for sort of a second innings of his career, if you will. And finally, we talk about his responsibilities as Joint Head of Chambers and what someone like Brian, having spent such a long time at the bar and having gained so much incredible experience and respect for his profession, what he thinks it takes and it will take for the next set of barristers to succeed in not only the criminal bar but just in the kind of the barrister's profession in general. I left feeling this episode so incredibly motivated, inspired to see that even after having such an illustrious career of such, kind of such prestige, Brian still continues to show up every day, wanting to be better, wanting to kind of show up in a better way, and being so grateful for all that he has achieved. Even though obviously that has all been a part of his own hard work and all the opportunities that he's taken advantage of. So it was just a really great reminder for me that despite the number of years, if you enjoy what you do and you continue challenging yourself, there's really no end in sight. You can continue going, and there's always more and more opportunities along that are coming your way. Just a quick request before we get into this episode. I would really appreciate it if kindly give the podcast a follow and a rating on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to these episodes, as it really helps Commerce Meets Law reach more listeners. Without further ado, I thoroughly hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll see you right at the end. Hi, Brian, and very warm welcome to Commerce Meets Law. Thank you so much for joining us. Such a pleasure to have you on. Before we start, we always have an icebreaker on the podcast, which is, in your opinion, what is your superpower?
Well, these are always very subjective things, and you gave me forewarning that you would ask me about that, and it's always difficult to be subjective about your own superpowers. But I like to think that one of the things that has got me where I am today is strategy. Looking around corners and seeing problems where they may arise, how they may arise, and seeing them off at the pass long before they ever do. And really, it's all about judgment and instincts. I've been at the bar now for getting on for 40, 42, 43 years or more, 44, I think. And you don't start with it. And there are many senior barristers I can think of who never have or exercise good judgment. I like to think that I have got pretty reasonable judgment, but you've either got it or you don't. But it's an essential, one of the most essential tools for any barrister: strategy, seeing problems, seeing round corners. And so, of all the superpowers I think I do have, said he boastfully, I think strategic thinking is one of them.
I love that answer. And yeah, very, very well put there as well. And speaking of strategy, of course, as you mentioned, you've had such a long and illustrious career at the bar. Did you always know that this is what you wanted to do? Did you have a strategy at the time, or did you kind of fall into it?
Um, when I was 16 years old, many years ago, there was a drama on television um, called Crown Court,
Mm,
and it was about criminal barristers and how they went about their professional life in chambers and in court.
mm,
And frankly, it was as simple as that. It had me hooked from the moment I watched that drama program on television. I'm afraid only people of a certain vintage will remember it, but I certainly do. And it was what led me really to being where I am today.
yeah, that's amazing. And when kind of were going through the process, obviously today, I guess it looks a little bit different in terms of, people wanting to enter certain parts of the bar and what that process looks like. But could you take us back and tell us a little bit about what those initial days were like when you first started in your career? Any moments that you can remember really vividly?
Um, like all barristers, I joined an Inn of Court,
Mm,
Middle Temple. I'm now a bencher of Middle Temple. And in those days, and I think still today, Middle Temple provided youngsters like me with sponsors. And you
mm,
would go and meet your sponsor and you would dine with them in hall from time to time. My sponsor was, um, uh, uh, at the time, a junior, now a silk in my chambers, Howard Godfrey. I became his pupil quite simply because when I went to meet him, I think it was in the late 70s, maybe early 80s, 1980 or thereabouts. I can remember going into a room where my chambers at the time had rooms at Three Hare Court in the Temple, and he sat me at the opposite side of his desk, a room that became mine years afterwards. And he said to me, "Have you got pupillage?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you want pupillage?" I said, "Yes, please." And that was it. Which is a very, very different state of affairs to what happens today. So
yeah.
that's one of my earliest memories. And in due course, I did become a pupil of Howard's, and I stayed with him for a year. In the early days, I did, as Chambers did at the time, a mixed common law practice,
Mm.
and I was taken on as a tenant in 1982. I was called in 1981, and I've been there ever since. So my earliest memory is of Howard, who's a great friend now. Anyway, in fact, I'm his head of chambers, which is bizarre when you think about it. But
Wow.
but that's my earliest memory, going out to courts with him and just being amazed by what was going on around me, what I was seeing and absorbing in terms of his practice, and
Yeah.
seeing and perhaps projecting, am I ever going to be able to do this? Is this something for me? Will I be capable of public speaking? Will I be able to do all of these things? So I started
Mm.
at a very low level, and just like I was saying earlier about building experience of judgment and instinct over the years, layer upon layer of experience, um, every day was a learning process, and I adored every minute of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I'm sure any aspiring barristers listening right now are probably thinking, "What is that recruitment process? How it never happened today." But those are different times, and I'm sure as head of chambers now, your recruitment process looks very different.
Yeah.
And I guess we spoke a little bit about that side of it, and of course, as you mentioned, being amazed by Howard, who's now a dear friend, and kind of how he went about it. On the other side, before we started recording, you were telling me a little bit about becoming Treasury Counsel and what that means. And me, like I'm sure a lot of us listening, weren't really aware of that, weren't sure of the symbolism of it. Could you tell us a bit about that journey of becoming Junior Treasury Counsel, starting with what that is and how you got to that position?
Yeah, what it is, it's a system which has been in place since the late 1800s.
Mm.
And the naming Treasury Counsel comes from the Treasury Solicitor, who many years ago would instruct members of the bar. And there is still,
Right.
in name, in effect, a Treasury Solicitor,
Yeah.
albeit he is now the head of the government legal department. But old diehards like me still call it Treasury Solicitors. Anyway, years before, the Treasury Solicitor would instruct, and I think that's where the name stuck, where the Treasury Solicitor in crime would instruct members of the bar to prosecute, or some. Eventually, that system was overtaken by the Director of Public Prosecutions, but the name stuck. And although the Crown Prosecution Service, which came into being in the mid-80s, has always been able to instruct barristers up and down the country,
Mm.
it was always of use to the government of the day to have a small core of barristers, the elite of the elite, with a room at the Old Bailey known as Treasury Counsel's Room, which has its own, if you like, corporate brain and memory and
Okay.
knowledge, um, uh, which is maintained today. And there are two ranks within the Treasury Counsel system, the junior and the senior ranks. Not all juniors become seniors. Years ago, if you became a senior, you were in all but rank regarded as a silk, or in today's money, King's Counsel. And in days of yore, when you left the room, because you only had a limited lifespan, I was there 16 years, which is perhaps a little longer than other people were present in that room and practiced their careers there. You would take silk. And that would be your announcement that you have left Treasury Counsel's room. You're now on the market, and many former Treasury Counsel, who are effectively permanent prosecutors at the Old Bailey, would then ply their trade at defending. That system slightly changed while I was there, and it meant that you could take silk, become Queen's Counsel, as I first did, while you
Right.
were there, and I did while I was there in 2008. But I was still Senior Treasury Counsel, and that system subsists today. The appointment is the Attorney General's. So it's in effect a government appointment, the principal law officer. And the work that Treasury Counsel did then and have done for years and still do to this day is principally prosecuting homicide, but typically the most high profile, difficult homicides, not just in London, but these days up and down the country,
Mm.
terrorism, official secrets, and a lot of advisory work which the public never gets to see on secret squirrel stuff. As I say,
Okay.
the numbers are kept quite low deliberately these days, and in fact, when I joined, the means of entry is a really difficult monitoring system, which takes a couple of years. People look at you. Are you going to be the kind of person who can maintain the really elite, excellent standards that the system requires? Now, fortunately, I was one of them. I was the first year of monitoring, and that system, which is far more refined and developed than it was when I was appointed in May 1997, so many years ago now, exists to this day. And I was fortunate, not only was I Junior Treasury Counsel in 2002, I was appointed Senior Treasury Counsel. In 2008, I became Silk, while I was still in Treasury Counsel's room. And in 2010, I was appointed by the attorney of the day, first senior Treasury Counsel, and I left as I had to in 2013. And first senior Treasury Counsel is effectively head boy, or girl, as the case may be. I don't think
Yeah.
there has been a woman number one yet. In fact, I'm fairly sure that there hasn't been. But
Right.
I was head boy during those years. So yeah, it's been a hell of a journey. I had no anticipation that it would happen to me because I was not in a set of chambers which had previously ever had Treasury Counsel. There were quite a few sets dotted around the Temple and in Gray's Inn in particular, where there had been Treasury Counsel over the years.
Yeah.
But I shot for the stars, and you mixing my metaphors, all of my ducks lined up in a row, and here I am.
Mm. That's amazing. And just to understand, I guess, for someone who's listening, to simplify it a bit, you had pupillage, you became a tenant, and then when you were Treasury Counsel, were you also technically part of the chambers, or at that point were you just kind of on
We
working part of the government, sort of?
no, we all Treasury Counsel came from a variety of different sets of chambers.
Okay, okay,
You stay as a member you still a member of the independent bar. You don't
right.
join the CPS or anything like that. You don't join the government legal department or the Treasury solicitors.
Okay,
You continue as a member of your chambers, paying whatever fees the arrangement requires, and when you leave, you just return to your chambers as an ordinary member. The truth of the matter is,
okay.
for the 16 years I was Treasury Counsel, I lived my life at the Old Bailey, and I very rarely went into chambers. You would have the odd pupil who would be with you at the Old Bailey and spend their time with you, watching you do sort of cases we did.
Yeah.
But no, you're still an ordinary member, independent member of the bar. You simply spend a lot of your time prosecuting. These days, there's a lot of encouragement, or there has been, for Treasury Counsel also to defend. But the reality is, the volume of work is just so vast that
Hmm.
there's very little time for it. But that doesn't mean that you can't do some advisory work for solicitors who require it.
Okay, so you could still
Yeah,
effectively do what you accept work from or accept
exactly.
instructions
In
effectively
theory.
from other
Yeah,
places as well. It's just you're perhaps the first call if there is a case of the Old
yeah,
Bailey and you are asked to prosecute. Okay, that makes sense. And I guess you at the start you were talking about when you were a pupil and you were seeing how sort of your sponsor was advocating and thinking, will I be able to do that? During those 16 years when you were Treasury Counsel, would you say that there are any cases that came to mind that kind of really fundamentally changed the way you approached your advocacy, or really, in a way, you look back and you think, wow, I really used my strategy well there. I'm proud of the work that I did.
Um, no, because as I said before, Shrey, I mean, being in any profession, it's all you're layering experience, and
Right.
you make the mistakes, and hopefully you don't make the same mistakes again. We all make
Yeah.
mistakes,
Yeah.
but hopefully, if we're on a sensible career path and we learn by our mistakes, we build experience and we build layers of know-how. Advocacy is no different.
Mm.
The advocate I am today is not the advocate I was when I began. You ask about my earliest memories. Um, uh, One early memory is the first time I ever got on my feet in a court, and I was in chambers one morning
Yeah.
as a second 6-month pupil, and a case came in. I was in chambers. My then clerk dispatched me off. I think it was to Highbury Corner Magistrates Court. And in those days, police officers would present cases to the magistrates, not trials, but perhaps bail applications or
Yeah.
mentions. And I can remember the time came for me to get to my feet where all I had to do was utter the words, I agree. And I couldn't have been more nervous in uttering those words. And then when I compare that to, cases I did years later where, some of the trials I did lasted 5 months. Some of the opening speeches I made to juries lasted 2, 3, 4 days. My personal best cross-examination of a defendant lasted 8 days, 9 days. So,
Wow.
so my point is, you can't, if somebody had told my younger self that one day, Brian, you will be doing these things,
Mm.
I would have laughed. but it's the same for everybody. You've got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And the process is you just got to learn by experience, learn by mistakes, learn by the mistakes not only of yourself, but of others.
Yeah.
Absorb it all. Don't do the same thing. Understand what happened and why and how to avoid it.
Yeah.
Look round corners and you surprise yourself as to what you can achieve. And I certainly have constantly surprised myself. And frankly, if I'm being honest, I probably have surprised everybody around me as well.
Uh, Absolutely. And looking at the question, I guess from a different angle, a lot of the cases that you've been a part of that you have either been kind of prosecuted, have been high profile, have been extremely sensitive subjects, have been cases that a lot of the public will know about, whether that's in public inquiries or cases themselves. I guess from that perspective, having done so many of these now, would you say that perhaps they affect you differently now, or, that term of like becoming desensitized to it to an extent, or do you still feel that, kind of, especially looking at those victims and knowing what they've gone through, does that weight still really bear on you
Um,
every time you take on a new case?
that's a very good, if I may say so, and insightful question because inevitably you do become desensitized. I mean,
Yeah.
in 16 years, I don't know what the statistics are, but I must have been involved in or prosecuted either as a junior or as a leader, either
Mm.
by which I mean senior Treasury Counsel stroke as
Yeah.
silk. 100, 200 murders.
Mm.
And unfortunately, and this is going to sound a bit gruesome, but it's not intended to be, you see in that period of time what man can do to man. You
Mm.
see how people can be killed in all sorts of different ways.
Mm.
And you see more appositely how fragile life can be.
Mm.
And you ask me what effect it has. Most people think it must have a dreadful emotional effect on you. Actually, it doesn't, because you can't allow it to. I
Yeah.
can't say, in all honesty, on the odd occasion I've prosecuted a case years ago, and I had to read a victim personal statement to the court after conviction and during the sentencing process, for example, by a parent whose child has been horribly killed. I can't say that it was easy to even hold myself together because, as a parent, you see yourself in that position, although in truth you are not. You are grateful
Yeah.
that you are not. And in truth, you don't really understand what that person has gone through. But, inevitably we're all human. And yes, I can remember one or two cases where I just held myself together in reading out the most emotional statement on behalf of a bereaved person about the loss and the impact it's had on the family. But there has been another effect for me. I have 4 kids, 2 daughters and 2 boys.
Yeah.
And the effect it's had is it has given me a far greater exaggerated sense of risk of all the awful things that could happen to them.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I have in mind one of the cases or 2 cases I prosecuted, the same defendant, Levi Belfield, who killed 3 women and attempted to kill another notorious serial killer whose name you may recognize.
Yeah.
First trial prosecuted 2007 to 2008, 5-month trial, and the second in 2011, the disappearance, abduction and killing of a girl called Millie Dowler. And when you look at how these poor girls lost their lives,
Mm.
one, for example, had gone out for an evening and she became a little drunk and she got a bus home. And because she was a little drunk, she missed her stop. And it was that mistake that cost her life because it allowed Belfield to spot her, follow her, and then just kill her for no good reason. And that always made me think that sort of fragility, that one error in that poor girl's life, had she got off the bus at her correct stop rather than miss her stop, she'd be alive today. That's not to
Mm.
say that another girl would not have met her fate, but that sort of fragility, that sort of chance,
Yeah.
always led me and my own family to become a bit too controlling, a bit too much of a helicopter parent. Don't do this instead. And, kids find it really difficult, as I'm sure
Mhm.
you would, with your parents telling you what to do or what not to do. But that is, for me, I recognize it's a real effect that it's had.
Yeah, yeah. And as you say, I think, what you find perhaps annoying when you're younger, I think as you get older and you realize the views and perspectives of your parents are
Mm,
coming from either from their own child experiences or their profession like
yeah,
yours.
mm,
I think it really puts in good perspective. But yeah, perhaps as a child you don't quite recognize that.
yeah,
You obviously you've prosecuted and so many high profile cases, led so many inquiries. And you mentioned a bit earlier your work also centers around advisory work, perhaps some work that the public don't know about. And I guess that is a different skill that's perhaps more, kind of looking forward as opposed to something that's happened and then there's a trial to investigate what's happened. I guess how did those skills differ for you, and perhaps what is it that changes in those two aspects, if anything?
well, I mean, the court process is is one in which certainly as a prosecutor you have to be prepared, you have to organize.
Mm,
I'm not last minute. I never have been. So everything was, insofar as I was able, meticulously prepared, well in
yeah,
advance. Everything had been thought through, on top
yeah,
of all the facts, even the most complicated cases. And it involves working, in my case, 7 days a week for years, being in court ready on a Monday morning, seeing it
mm,
through to the Friday, and on repeat, week after week after week, and just keeping that standard going. But in essence, that's an advocacy
yeah,
process. In the end, you're on your feet. We all, as barristers, are inadequate and insecure, and we all have a risk of exposure. And the worst form of exposure is when you're prosecuting a high profile case with the world's media there, and you don't want to cock up. So for
yeah,
me, at least, that meant over preparation, overthinking, just about over
mm,
everything. Um, but being on your feet, making it count, reading the room, understanding the psychology of what you're doing, the psychology of your audience, who you're speaking to, what works, what doesn't work. So that's the major part of what I used to do.
mm,
Advisory work is different because you get given a set of facts. It may be a factual issue, more customarily with a legal issue, and people want you to help them with their issues and advise in a particular situation whether there is a legal issue or there is no legal issue, and how the law applies to a particular set of facts. And that is a sit down with the papers at the computer and drafting, hopefully, a beautifully crafted advice which a client can understand and read and take away and say, this is the answer. So
mm.
they're two entirely different skill sets, and some can do both, and some can only do one or the other.
Yeah. And would you say that's one that you prefer, or do you enjoy both of them equally for different reasons?
I do less advocacy these days. As I say, I did 16 years of it when I was at the Old Bailey. When I left the Old Bailey in 2013, I carried on for some years, still prosecuting some pretty high-profile cases.
Yeah.
But the last case I prosecuted, I never really got into defending. I did a couple of defense cases, but I just didn't particularly enjoy it. So I carried on doing the odd big prosecution. But the last one I did was in 2020, around the first lockdown, the first COVID lockdown.
Mm.
Um, by that time, I had been asked to take over as lead counsel to the inquiry, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, which, albeit I had never done a public inquiry before, they needed, I was told, a safe pair of hands and somebody with my skill set. So kicking and screaming, I did take it over because it was a massive inquiry. There had been a lot of adverse publicity in the press about it, a lot of government
Yeah.
issues around it. But I did take it over, and it turned out to be the best decision I'd made in the past 10, 15 years, because it led me into a different world entirely. The skill set's the same. It's still advocacy, but it's a different form of advocacy.
Mm.
And that led to my being asked to be lead counsel to another inquiry. And I have continued with my inquiry work. As you may know, I represented Boris Johnson in the COVID inquiry.
Yeah.
And I'm now up to my eyeballs in the Afghanistan inquiry for the Ministry of Defence.
Wow. Wow.
That's
So it's like it's a whole new career path that's opened up
it
essentially.
is, and I enjoy it thoroughly. I'm very lucky, and I make perfectly clear to anybody who's listening to this. I feel completely privileged
Yeah.
to have been doing all of these things. I've been allowed to do some fantastic cases, criminal
Mm.
cases over the years, homicide and terrorism. I've met some fantastic people, and I've looked after some fantastic people. The inquiry world is a bit different. But I have been equally privileged to be in some highly sensitive, high-profile cases, almost also acting for Post Office during their trials and
Yeah.
tribulations over the Horizon scandal. And so I've been in many high-profile things over the years, and I still cast my mind back to the youngster I was, the green-skinned barrister in 1981 when I was called, and think, how did that all happen?
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible. And we've spoken so much about, especially I think now there is somewhat, as you mentioned, adverse publicity, but that idea of with criminal law and all the issues of the criminal bar in terms of pay and kind of people not wanting to go into it as much. And I think seeing someone like you who has spent, so many decades at the bar and has had such an illustrious career, I think it's important people to know that for those who are really passionate about it, as passionate as you, maybe if they've watched a TV show of their own and they want to enter into the profession. And I guess speaking of that, you're now a joint head of chambers yourself. So I just wanted to quickly at the end ask you a little bit about that so that for anyone listening, if they want to now enter the profession, they know that there's something there. Can you tell us a bit about how that opportunity came about and what your role looks like as joint head of chambers?
I'm not going to call it an opportunity. My description would be burden. I think the truth of the matter is that a set of chambers, albeit is not like a firm of solicitors because we're not a partnership. As you know, we're all
Yeah.
independent barristers, but we assemble in a building, which typically will apply its name to the set. In our case, we used to be 2 Bedford Row. We've now rebranded as 2BR because we actually moved out of 2 Bedford Row, where we've been for many years, and we're now in a more modern building in Chancery Lane. But we kept the brand, but we're now 2BR. Our chambers is now about 80 strong. We have 23 silks, with the balance being
Mhm.
junior barristers, and 15 to 20 staff members. So we are a business. But unlike some solicitors firms, which is really crazy, we don't have, when you're, if in effect, the senior partner, like myself and my joint head, Christine Agnew KC, we don't actually have PAs and we don't have secretaries, and we
Mhm.
have to do a lot ourselves. But the truth of the matter is people need to step up. People who are known in the profession need to step up and do the things which many people won't do for their set. So we have a management committee, we have subcommittees, equality and diversity, we have
Mhm.
ad hoc committees that we need from time to time. We have groups, practice groups, health and safety, general crime, you name it, we have it. But people need to get their hands dirty because in the end, this is their set. In my case, our last head of chambers resigned in about 2019. William Clegg KC is very known silk, but he'd been at the helm for 25 years, which is far too long, and being head of chambers wears you down eventually. So
Mm.
in 2019, it was my turn, and I felt, given my practice and what I hope is my reputation in the market, I, together with another well-known silk in my chambers, Jim Sturman, we became and were elected joint heads in 2019. Jim stepped down just over a year ago. He had had enough because it takes a huge chunk out of your week. I mean, I can reckon to do another 10 hours a week just on Chambers
Wow.
issues.
Yeah.
COVID for the pair of us was really difficult. Because we were heads during the COVID period, and we've had other issues since, and it actually is very wearing. It's very burdensome. So Jim stepped down, and Christine took over. I've got to think, maybe 18 months ago. I may be doing her a disservice, but she is fantastic. Two other silks really in the main core team are Jacqueline Carey and Simon Baker. He's our treasurer. Jacqueline is our deputy head, and they're a fantastic core team, work extremely hard on behalf of Chambers, and they have helped drive us forward, even from where we were, because, running a set, like any modern business or partnership in this day and age, is difficult, with all of the regulatory provisions and criteria that you have to comply with. Keeping the ship steady and everybody happy is itself a difficult undertaking. So that's why, Shreya, I balked at your use of the word opportunity.
Yes.
The opportunity did come knocking, and I answered the call. But the
Yeah.
truth is, it is a burden. It's a happy burden, and frankly, I wouldn't do it or continue to do it if it became too much. Eventually, I will stand down when a younger person will have to take over my slot. But at the moment, we're very happy that our Chambers 2BR is going in the right direction for all sorts of different reasons, and I'm very happy to be at the helm.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible, and as you say, a burden, but one that I can see that you do somewhat enjoy, at least until you decide that it's time for you to step down, someone else step up. And for anyone listening, just as a final question, who's been really inspired by your journey, who really wants to go into criminal law, who may want to apply to BR and do their pupillage there, like you started many years ago. What would you say that you, as the head of Chambers, someone recruiting is looking for in a barrister? What do you think that they should be, the skills they should be building on right now?
Well, the first thing is we have a mini pupillage scheme. So if people haven't made up their minds, they can go to our website and have a look at mini pupillage and make an application at the right time.
Yeah.
And we have a small committee that deals with that. Pupillage, I have nothing to do with, but we do have a very skillful, well-honed pupillage committee, and anybody out there who wants to become a barrister knows that there's a pupillage gateway, I think, and you can look up what sets offer and who you want to apply to, and you have to go through quite a rigorous process. And in fact, my Chambers is going through that now. But to answer your question more directly, what do we look for? I think we look for people who are committed. We don't want people who apply to us, become pupils, and then turn their backs and disappear, or become tenants and say, actually, this isn't for me. So you really need to understand what you're going in for. We're a very busy set, and all of our juniors do extremely well. So commitment, dedication, a willingness to work hard. There are no shortcuts. Somebody who will, perhaps unlike me, be not scared of the sound of their own voice when they are young, and have sufficient confidence to be on their feet and do the advocacy, be comfortable with the sound of their own voice. Good standards, ethical standards, integrity, all of the above, and a modicum of judgment and good instincts, which they can build on over the years.
Yeah,
Well, I hope that's not
incredible.
much of a to-do list, but that for me is what I look for.
Yeah, and I think it obviously all of these they're not to be achieved by a tick box. Of course, work in progress. But I think even being able to recognize what you're working towards is important. So I'm sure it may not be a checklist before you start, but it may be a success criteria for people listening.
Yeah.
But on that note, Brian, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak to you. I know you must have given so many interviews over the years, so thank you for choosing
You're
to
very
come.
welcome, Shreya, and thank you for inviting me.
And on that note, thank you so much for listening to this episode, and a massive shout out to Brian for coming on Commerce Meets Law. As I always do at the end of these episodes, I just wanted to share a little bit of perhaps behind the scenes, as I like to do, about how this episode came together or my thoughts on the episode. And I will be completely honest. I love speaking to barristers, especially, and I love kind of speaking to them about the cases they've worked on, their journeys. But the one thing I always fear is just how articulate they are and just how incredible storytellers they are, because that's part of their everyday role. That's what they've been doing for such a long time. And for someone as successful as Brian, and for someone as, kind of experienced and who's done it for such a long time, sometimes it fills you with a bit of bit of anxiety, a bit of nervousness before you decide to speak to someone like that, because you feel like they have so much more experience and that imposter syndrome tends to kick in. But I think what I realized through this episode was that whilst of course all of those things are true, and Brian is incredibly articulate in the way he speaks and the way he delivers and answers questions, I also realized that it was possible to be able to have a conversation. And I think his ability to put me at ease and to answer questions with patience and kindness, and also very directly rather than, at all skirting around the questions or anything like that. I think it just goes to show that sometimes you really have to put that imposter syndrome to one side and just shoot your shot, because you never know the kinds of conversations that you can end up having. And that's something I really took away from this episode. So if you've listened all the way to this point, this is again just a reminder that the opportunity in front of you or the person you're speaking to may seem like you don't deserve it, or you aren't at that position, but all of those people have had mentors and have had people that have helped them, and a lot of them want to do the same for those who are either 2 or 3 steps behind them, or a many steps behind them. And I think it's really important to remember that. So I hope that you take this as your little reminder to just go and chase after that, because you never know what you may end up finding. But just as a final reminder, of course, all of the episodes can be found on our website, and with the same name, or you can also email at commercemeetslaw@gmail.com, or you can also DM us if you want to reach out and give us any feedback. That would be highly appreciated. And finally, for access to my content, do check out the Commerce Meets Law YouTube channel and our TikTok. For now, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you hopefully soon on the next episode.